At this point, I've reviewed enough thermal cameras that I'm starting to wonder, should I just install a sauna and call it market research? Well, today's contestants, Thermal Master P3, which looks like it was designed by aerospace engineers with no regard for human rights, and Flir One Pro, which has brand recognition, low resolution sensor, and charisma of a tax return. Unlike my last video with Geiger counter, this device is actually much more useful. You can use it to diagnose overheating PCBs, find a leak in the walls, or make your phone look like it's cosplaying as a tricorder. Full disclosure, Thermal Master P3 was sent to me for free for a review, but I'm not being paid to say anything nice about it, which is convenient because I wasn't planning to. On paper, the numbers make the P3 look like it showed up to actually compete. You get a 256 by 192 sensor, which the marketing department proudly upscales to 512 by 384 using something they call X3IR. It's basically sharpening for people who like big numbers. The net D or sensitivity is at 35 millikelvin, although it's hard to measure without military grade autoclave. Flir One Pro does have a wider field of view, 50 by 43 degrees, compared to P3's 40 by 30, so it sees more at once, just with less detail. P2 Pro, by the way, actually had even wider field of view, 56 by 42, which makes it more practical for home inspections. Frame rates, P3 gives you the more or less usable 25 Hz, nice and smooth. Flir is locked to 8 Hz because export restrictions are still pretending it's a Cold War. Okay, let's start with a simple act of plugging the thing in. On my iPhone 14 Pro, P3 takes about 10 to 15 seconds to wake up, which is just long enough to regret my life choices. On iPhone 16 Pro, it's faster, about 4 to 6 seconds. But this is where Flir has the advantage. You can plug it in, go make a coffee, and by the time you're back, it should be just about ready to go. Since P3 relies on the phone's camera, you might be worried about battery life. Well, in my testing, after 10 minutes of use, P3 drained about 2% on a 2-year-old phone. For comparison, watching a YouTube video for the same amount of time only cost me about 1%. So, staring at heat is officially more expensive than doom scrolling. For indoor home inspection, P3 immediately proves it wasn't designed for anyone with walls, floors, or depth perception. The field of view is so narrow that you basically have to stitch together your own panoramic view just to see the entire wall. And because it's manual focus, you're constantly twisting the dial, for at one setting, wall at another setting, ceiling at the third setting. So by the time you finish, you basically speed ran a course in optometry. The detail is great once it's focused, but it's a kind of great that makes you think, wow, I wish I wasn't doing this by hand for every single shot. Outside, it's more of the same. P3's focus quickly turns into manual labor, and you have to keep stepping back just to fit the whole building in a frame. Meanwhile, Flir's MSX overlay may not win awards for resolution, but at least you can tell you're looking at a house instead of a blurry infrared ransom note. Bottom line, both can technically do home inspection, but if you do it with any regularity, you'd skip both of these and grab the P2 instead, which you'd already know if you suffered through my previous comparisons. On a circuit board, P3 finally redeems itself. You can get right up close, focus down to millimeters, and actually see which component is throwing a tantrum. The detail is excellent. It feels less like thermal imaging and more like spying on electrons with night vision goggles. But it's not perfect. Subtle temperature differences barely show up unless something is dramatically hotter or colder than its neighbors. So if you're hunting for a 1 degree anomaly, good luck. Flir, on the other hand, cheats with its MSX overlay. At glance, it's easier to figure out where you're pointing resistor, capacitor, or some random blob. But the parallax at close range make it about as accurate as guessing, so you have to adjust it constantly. So yes, one is a magnifying glass for actual thermal detail, and the other one is a children's coloring book with outlines. Take your pick. Now in the dark, P3 doesn't even flinch. Total blackout still works. Even Riddick would be jealous. which is nice because sometimes the thing that you're trying to diagnose is the reason that the lights are off in the first place. Flir, on the other hand, depends on its MXX overlay, and the moment there is no visible light, the outline just vanishes. Suddenly your high-tech tool is giving you thermal Rorschach tests. For comparison, here's what the same shot looks like on regular video. That's the breaker panel and my home lab rack. P3 shows it clearly in thermal, no lighting required, and Flir, it's just colorful cloud of guesswork that could be servers or maybe a lava lamp. P3 also comes with a few quirks that make it feel like it was rushed out the door. It technically works with USB-C to lightning adapter and even an extension cable at the same time, which is funny because older P2 flat out refused that setup. So small victory, I guess. But then you run into stuff that screams beta product. For example, my first firmware update crashed the app, the second one worked. The confirmation dialog is in Chinese, which is less of a bug and more of a surprise language lesson. And figuring out the firmware versions make you question your math abilities. Flir, on the other hand, doesn't have that problem. Their team apparently decided that they achieved perfection sometime around 2018, because the firmware hasn't been touched in at least 7 years. It's stable, sure, but so is a fossil. So here's where we'll end. Neither of these cameras is actually great for home inspections. The field of view is too narrow, and the constant refocusing on P3 makes it feel more like a fidget toy than a tool. Flir is easier to live with, but the resolution is low enough that it often feels like you're paying for the logo more than the sensor. P3 clearly has sharper thermal detail and can get in close for PCB work, but the finicky software, the language mishaps, the manual focus make it a little frustrating in real-world use. Flir, meanwhile, is more or less polished, but you're locked into sensor that it was underwhelming 5 years ago and hasn't improved since, because apparently Flir sticks to the philosophy, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So who are these cameras for? Well, Flir One is clearly for home inspectors who don't value their time, electricians who are part-time psychics, and HVAC folks. Basically anyone who wants to point at a wall and say, yep, that's hot. Thermal Master P3 is more specialized. I'd say it's best suited for static setups where you don't have to constantly fiddle with focus, like the assembly lines checking for overheating parts, lab environments, PCB diagnostics, maybe even server farms where you're looking for that one board that's cooking itself. It also makes sense for thermal hobbyists, the kind of people who will happily spend half a Saturday pointing at random objects just to see what glows. You could even make a case for R&D teams who care more about the high thermal resolution than the ease of use. In other words, it's an engineer's toy box camera, not something you hand to a contractor walking through a house. And that's it, the two thermal cameras, neither of which is perfect, and both of which I'll probably keep using anyway, because I made some bad financial decisions and now thermal imaging is apparently my personality.